Della Sutter ran the last quarter-mile barefoot because her left boot had split at the sole, and the right one had blood in it. The road from the Stokes Ranch into Roan Creek was nothing but frozen ruts in March, and every step drove the cold higher into her shins, until she could not feel her toes at all. She carried no bag. She had not planned to leave tonight. She had planned to stay one more week, collect the $4 Virgil Haskell owed her, and ride the mail coach south to her cousin in Helena. But Haskell had come back from the bunkhouse drunk and mean, and when she told him supper was already cold, he struck her across the mouth with the back of his hand, and when she fell, he kicked her in the ribs, and when she tried to stand, he shoved her into the stove. The burn on her forearm was the thing that finally broke through the fog of endurance she had wrapped around herself for 9 months. She had waited at the door until his snoring shook the walls, and then she had walked into the dark. The town was 3 miles. She made it in under an hour, because fear is a better engine than any horse. Main Street was empty. The saloon had gone dark. The only light she could see was the orange glow of a banked forge at the far end of the block, where the Farrier shop stood open to the night because Caleb Jessup sometimes worked late, finishing shoes for the Tuesday coach team. She did not knock. She stepped inside the wide door and stood in the heat of the forge, and pressed her hands against her ribs, and tried to decide whether she was going to cry, or be sick, or simply fall down. The warmth hit her like a wall, and her knees buckled, and she sat on the packed earth floor, between the anvil and a barrel of spent nails, and put her forehead on her knees. Caleb heard the sound before he saw her. A hitch of breath, half swallowed, the kind of noise a person makes when they have been holding themselves together by sheer will, and the will has finally run out. He set the hoof rasp on the bench and came around the partition and found a woman sitting on his floor in a torn dress, with blood on her lip and a burn the width of a stovetop lid running up her left forearm. Her hair was loose and full of hay. Her feet were bare and blue with cold. He did not ask her name. He did not ask what happened. He pulled his wool-lined canvas coat off the hook by the door and draped it over her shoulders and said, quietly, "You are safe here." Her eyes came up. They were the color of creek water over brown stone, and they were full of something he recognized because he had seen it in the mirror for a year after Catherine died. The flat exhaustion of a person who has absorbed too much pain and has nothing left to absorb it with. He brought her a tin cup of water from the barrel. Then he went to the back room where he slept on a rope-frame cot and pulled the blanket off and carried it back and laid it across her legs. He lit the lamp on the workbench and looked at her arm. The burn was angry and blistered, but not deep enough to need the doctor tonight. He found the tin of calendula salve he kept for his own nicks and burns and held it out to her. "May I?" he asked. She nodded. He spread the salve across the burn as gently as he could, his rough hands moving slowly. She flinched once and then held still. He wrapped the arm in a strip of clean muslin and tied it off and sat back on his heels and looked at her face. The bruise on her jaw was going purple. Her lip was split on the left side. "Haskell," she said. It was not a question. "I know who he is," Caleb said. "He owes me $4. I cooked for that ranch for 9 months, and he paid me twice." Her voice was steady now, thin but steady, like a wire pulled taut. "I am not going back." "No," Caleb said. "You are not." He gave her the cot. He slept on the floor beside the forge with a horse blanket, and his boots still on, because he did not know whether Haskell would come looking for her tonight, and he wanted to be standing when the man arrived. Haskell arrived at dawn. Caleb heard the horse before the sun cleared the ridge. A hard gallop, reckless on frozen ground, the kind of riding a man does when he is still half drunk and fully angry. He was already at the door when Haskell reined up and swung down. Haskell was a big man, wide through the chest, with a red face and small, quick eyes that never looked at a thing the same way twice. "My cook ran off," Haskell said. "Took my coat and $2 from the kitchen tin." "She is here," Caleb said. He did not move from the doorway. "She took nothing." "Then send her out." Caleb looked at the man for a long moment. He was not tall himself, but he was built from years of hammer work, thick through the shoulders and arms, with hands that could bend a cold shoe if the fire went out. He had not raised those hands against another man since the war. He did not want to now. "She is not going back with you," Caleb said. Haskell's face went dark. "That woman owes me labor. She signed on for a year, and she has not finished the term. She signed on for wages you never paid. There is no contract where there is no pay." Caleb kept his voice flat. He could feel Della behind him in the shop, standing now, the blanket still around her shoulders. "You owe her $4, Haskell. I will collect it on her behalf." Haskell took a step forward. "You are making a mistake, Farrier. I have made several in my life. This is not one of them." Something in Caleb's voice, or perhaps in the way he stood, square in the door with his weight forward and his hands loose at his sides, made Haskell stop. The foreman looked past him into the shop and found Della's eyes, and what he saw there was not fear. It was the particular calm of a woman who had already survived the worst he could do. "I will be back with the sheriff," Haskell said. "Good," Caleb said. "Bring him. He can see the burn on her arm." Haskell mounted and rode out without another word. The sheriff came alone at mid-morning. Tom Bridger was a lean, quiet man who had been elected 3 times because he listened before he spoke, and he never drew his pistol unless he meant to fire it. He came into the farrier's shop and took off his hat and looked at Della's arm and her jaw and her lip, and then sat down on the bench and asked her to tell him what happened. She told him. She started at the beginning. The advertisement in the Helena paper for a ranch cook, the coach ride north, the first week when Haskell was civil and the work was honest, and then the slow tightening, the missed wages, the locked pantry so she could not eat until the men had finished, the first slap in November, the shove into the wall in December, the kicks in January and February, and last night the stove. Bridger wrote it all down in a small leather-bound book. When she finished, he looked at Caleb and said, "You willing to sign a statement that you saw the injuries when she arrived?" "Yes." Bridger nodded. "I will arrest Haskell this afternoon. The circuit judge comes through in 2 weeks. She will need to testify. She will have a place to stay until then," Caleb said. He had not looked at Della when he said it. He had not needed to. Della stayed. The first week she slept on the cot, and Caleb slept on the floor, and they spoke only in small, practical sentences. "Water is hot. Bread is on the shelf. Your arm needs fresh salve." She was quiet in the way of a person who has learned that silence is safer than sound, and Caleb did not press her. He went about his work. He shod horses and repaired wagon rims, and mended the iron latch on the church door, and she watched him from the cot with the blanket pulled up to her chin, and her creek-water eyes following the arc of his hammer. On the 4th day she stood up and swept the shop floor without being asked. On the 5th day she found his cast-iron skillet under a pile of rags, and cooked a supper of beans and salt pork and cornbread that was better than anything he had eaten since Catherine died. He told her so, and she looked at him as if he had handed her something valuable and breakable. On the 7th day she said, "You have not asked me for anything." Caleb set the hoof knife down and looked at her. "I do not intend to." Why? He thought about it. He was a man who thought before he spoke, which was why he spoke so rarely. "Because you came to my door hurt and afraid, and that is enough. You do not owe me anything for being decent." She looked at him for a long time, and then she nodded, once, and something in her face shifted. Not softened, exactly, but opened, like a window that had been nailed shut for a long time, and someone had finally worked the nails free. The days turned into weeks. Haskell sat in the Roan Creek jail, waiting for the circuit judge, and Della cooked and cleaned, and slowly began to talk. She told Caleb about growing up on her father's farm outside Missoula, about the winter her father died and the bank took the land, about the year she spent washing clothes at the hotel in Helena, before she answered Haskell's advertisement, because she thought a ranch would be better than a laundry. She told him about her mother's biscuit recipe and her brother, who had gone to sea and never written. She told him these things in the evenings while the forge cooled and the lamplight turned the shop amber, and he sat across from her whittling pegs for horseshoes and listening. He did not tell her much about himself. He told her Catherine had died of fever 3 years ago, and that he had kept working because the horses still needed shoes, and the work kept him from thinking too much. He told her he had fought at Shiloh, and come home with a piece of metal in his hip that ached when the weather changed. He told her he liked the smell of iron and the sound a well-made shoe makes when it rings true on the anvil. She said, "You are a good man, Caleb Jessup." He said, "I am an ordinary man who happened to have his door open." "No," she said, "you are not ordinary. An ordinary man would have sent me back." The circuit judge arrived on a Tuesday. Della testified in the courtroom above the general store, standing straight in a dress the minister's wife had given her, her voice clear and steady, as she described 9 months of labor without pay and a rising tide of violence. The burn scar on her forearm was still pink and tight, and she held it up when the judge asked to see it. Haskell's lawyer argued she had abandoned a valid contract. The judge looked at the lawyer and said, "Show me the receipts of payment," and the lawyer could not, and the judge ordered Haskell to pay $8 in back wages plus a $10 fine, and banned him from coming within a mile of Della Sutter for the remainder of his time in the territory. Caleb was waiting outside the courtroom when she came down the stairs. He was holding his hat in his hands, the way he always did when he was unsure of himself, turning it by the brim with his thick fingers. "It is done," she said. "It is done." She looked at him. The spring sun was behind him, and it lit the edges of his hair, and the dust on his shoulders, and the careful, patient worry on his face. "I have $8 now," she said. "I can take the coach to Helena." "You can," he said. He put his hat on. He took it off again. "Or you can stay." "Why would I stay?" He looked at his boots. He looked at the sky. He looked at her. "Because I sleep better knowing you are under my roof. Because the shop has not been this clean since I built it. Because I have eaten better in 3 weeks than in 3 years. He paused. "Because I would like very much for you to stay, Della. Not as a cook, not as a debt. As someone I am glad to see every morning." She did not answer right away. She stood on the courthouse steps in the spring sunlight with $8 in her pocket, and the whole territory open to her, and she looked at this quiet man who had opened his door in the middle of the night and given her his coat and his word, and asked for nothing in return. And she felt something she had not felt in so long, she had forgotten the shape of it. It was not gratitude, though she was grateful. It was not relief, though she was relieved. It was the feeling of being seen, fully, clearly, without conditions, by someone strong enough to protect her, and gentle enough to let her choose. "I will stay," she said. He smiled. It was a rare thing, Caleb Jessup's smile, slow and broad and startled, as if his own face had surprised him. He held out his hand and she took it, and they walked back down Main Street to the Farrier's shop, where the forge was banked, and the anvil was cold, and the afternoon light came through the wide door like a benediction. 3 months later, on a Saturday in June, when the wildflowers had come up thick along the creek, they stood in front of the minister in the little white church at the end of Main Street and said the words. Della wore a blue calico dress she had sewn herself from cloth Caleb had bought at the general store without telling her, leaving it folded on the bench with a note that said only, "For you." Caleb wore his good shirt, the one Catherine had made him, and when the minister asked if he took this woman, he said, "I do," in a voice so steady it could have held up a roof. That night they sat on the bench outside the shop and watched the stars come up over the ridge and listened to the creek running over the stones. Della leaned into him, and he put his arm around her, and she felt the weight and warmth of it and thought, this is what it is supposed to feel like. Not the flinch, not the brace, not the held breath, just the quiet sureness of a man who would rather cut off his own hand than raise it against her. "Caleb," she said. "Yes. Thank you for leaving the door open." He pulled her closer. "Thank you for walking through it." The forge was cold. The stars were bright. The town was still. And in the Farrier's shop at the end of Main Street in Roan Creek, Montana, 2 people who had come through loss and pain and silence sat together in the dark and did not need to say another word, because the word had already been given, and it was enough.